Something very interesting is happening in America this September, and I don't think these stories should be looked at separately. On September the 15th, the US Senate is expected to take the next major procedural step on the Clarity Act. Then, one day later, Circle is planning to launch ARC, its own blockchain built specifically around stablecoin finance. Those might look like two completely separate stories. One is regulation, one is technology. But put them together with what Mastercard, Visa, JPMorgan, Stripe, and DTCC are doing, and I think we start to see something much bigger taking shape. For years, crypto has had innovation without clear rules. Now America is getting closer to deciding what those rules should look like. At almost exactly the same time, major financial companies are building infrastructure designed to operate inside them. So let's start with clarity. The Clarity Act is trying to solve one of the biggest problems the US crypto industry has faced for years. Who actually regulates what? Is a particular digital asset a security? Is it a commodity? Does it fall under the SEC? Does it fall under the CFTC? What rules apply to exchanges and intermediaries? What happens when you move into areas like decentralized finance? Without clear answers to those questions, companies have spent years operating in an environment where regulation has often happened through enforcement rather than through one clear legal framework. Clarity is designed to change that. And importantly, this legislation is not starting from scratch. The House has already passed its version. The Senate Banking Committee has already advanced its version. And over the summer, senators have been trying to merge different parts of the legislation into something that can actually get enough votes to pass the Senate. The problem is that getting through committee and getting through the Senate are very different things. Senate Republicans need Democratic support to overcome procedural hurdles, and that means they need to find compromise on some of the most difficult parts of the bill. There are still disagreements around DeFi, illicit finance, stablecoin rewards and yields, and how far ethics rules should go for senior government officials with financial interests in crypto. Banks are also paying very close attention because one of the biggest questions buried inside all of this is what happens if stablecoins start competing directly with bank deposits. If consumers and businesses can hold digital dollars outside the traditional banking system and potentially earn attractive rewards, banks worry that deposits could leave the banking system. And deposits are important because banks use them as part of the funding base for lending. So this isn't just a technical disagreement about a wording in a crypto bill. There are major financial interests involved. You have banks, stablecoin issuers, crypto exchanges, DeFi companies, regulators, politicians, all trying to influence what this new framework eventually looks like. And this is why the September vote matters. Senate Majority Leader John Thune has now taken the procedural step needed to move the legislation forward when the Senate returns from recess. Now, I want to be really clear here. September 15th is not expected to be the final passage of the Clarity Act. It is the next major procedural hurdle. The Senate still needs enough votes to move the bill forward, and that remains the big test. But even getting to this stage matters because it tells us the legislation is still very much alive. But now, here's where I think the story becomes much more interesting. Because while Washington's been arguing about how digital finance should be regulated, Circle has been building. Circle is the company behind USDC, one of the largest stablecoins in the world. And USDC already exists across multiple major blockchains: Ethereum, Solana, Base, and others. So if Circle can already move USDC across existing blockchain networks, why does it need its own blockchain? That's the question I think matters. Circle is launching ARC, a new layer 1 blockchain designed specifically around stablecoin finance. And that immediately tells us something about where Circle thinks this market is heading. Arc isn't being positioned as another general purpose blockchain designed around meme coins, NFTs, or speculative trading. The focus is much more financial. Stablecoin payments, settlement, foreign exchange, capital markets, institutional transactions. And one of the most interesting features is that USDC itself is designed to be used for transaction fees. That matters because traditional financial institutions don't necessarily want to hold some volatile cryptocurrency just to pay gas fees. If you're a bank, payments company, or large corporation, predictable dollar-denominated transaction costs make a lot more sense. Circle's also talking about predictable fees, fast settlement, and infrastructure designed around institutional financial use. And this is where I think Circle's strategy starts looking much bigger than simply issuing USDC. Circle may be trying to move from being a stablecoin company to becoming part of the infrastructure underneath digital finance. Think about the difference. If you issue USDC, you make money from the stablecoin itself. But if you also provide the network where stablecoins move, where financial institutions settle transactions, and where tokenized assets potentially interact, you're moving much deeper into the financial stack. And that's why I think the timing next to clarity is so interesting. America is trying to define the rules. Circle is building infrastructure designed to operate inside a regulated digital financial system. And Circle is not alone. Visa's been expanding stablecoin settlement across multiple blockchain networks. This is important because Visa is not betting everything on one chain. It's preparing for a world where customers and financial institutions may use different networks. Mastercard is doing something similar. It's expanded stablecoin settlement support across several digital currencies, including USDC, PayPal's PYUSD, and Ripple's RLUSD. Again, the message is not that one token or one blockchain is going to take over everything. The payment companies appear to be preparing for a multi-network system. Then we have JPMorgan. JPMorgan has spent years building Connexes. It's blockchain-based financial infrastructure. It also has a JPM coin, which is not the same thing as a stablecoin. It's essentially tokenized commercial bank money. And that distinction is really important because stablecoins are not the only possible form of digital money. Banks can also put traditional deposits onto blockchain infrastructure. So now imagine the financial system we could end up with. You might have USDC moving through Circle's Arc. You might have RLUSD on XRP Ledger. You may have tokenized bank deposits issued by JPMorgan or other banks. You might have stablecoins moving through Visa and Mastercard settlement systems. And then you've got companies like Stripe. Stripe, working with Paradigm, has developed Tempo, another blockchain focused heavily on payments and stablecoin use. Again, that tells us the market is moving away from the idea that blockchain is purely about speculative assets. Major companies are increasingly asking, how do we move money? How do we settle transactions? How do we make payments programmable? How do we operate 24 hours a day instead of being tied completely to traditional banking hours? And then we get to perhaps the biggest signal of all, DTCC. DTCC sits at the center of traditional US securities infrastructure. It processes enormous amounts of activity across stocks, bonds, and other financial assets. And DTCC is now moving ahead with tokenization infrastructure of its own. That matters because once we start talking about DTCC, we're no longer talking about crypto companies trying to convince Wall Street to experiment with blockchain. We're talking about the infrastructure of Wall Street itself starting to use tokenization. And that's the connection I think most people need to understand. Circle is not building Arc as a vacuum. Clarity is not being debated as a vacuum. Visa, Mastercard, JPMorgan, Stripe, and DTCC are all moving in slightly different directions, but they're all responding to the same broader shift. Money is becoming more programmable, settlements becoming faster, assets are becoming tokenized, and the boundary between traditional finance and blockchain infrastructure is getting harder to see. Now, none of this means the current financial system disappears overnight. Banks are not going away. Visa and Mastercard are not disappearing. And stablecoins are not guaranteed to replace bank deposits. What may happen instead is that the existing financial system gradually absorbs parts of blockchain technology, and that is why regulation becomes so important. Institutions need to know what they're legally allowed to do, who supervises them, what assets can they issue, what standards they need to meet, and what happens when something goes wrong. Without those rules, major institutions can experiment. With those rules, they can start building at scale. And this is why I think September could be more important than it first looks. On one day, America could take another major step towards defining the legal structure for digital assets. On the next, Circle plans to launch infrastructure built specifically around digital money. And behind those two headlines, some of the biggest companies in global finance are already preparing for a world where stablecoins, tokenized deposits, and tokenized assets move across blockchain-based systems. For years, crypto had the technology but lacked the rules. Now, those two sides may finally be starting to meet. And if that continues, the biggest story in crypto may not be which coin performs best next month. It may be how much of the financial system quietly moves onto this new infrastructure over the next few years. So I want to know what you think. Are we watching blockchain slowly become part of the existing financial system? Or do you think we're still much further away from that than these developments suggest? Let me know in the comments, because I genuinely want to hear where you think this is heading. And if you enjoyed looking beyond the daily price movements and understanding what's actually changing across crypto, regulation, and finance, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.